The massive alien weapon hung in space above Earth like a giant metal moon of death. For 3 long months, the Vorthak Empire had been threatening humanity with complete destruction. Their enormous superweapon, called the Star Eater, was bigger than most cities and could destroy entire planets with a single shot. Admiral Kim Jae stood on the bridge of the Defense Station Guardian, watching through the reinforced windows as the alien weapon slowly turned toward Earth. His hands were steady, but inside his heart was racing. He had seen what this terrible machine could do. Just 2 weeks ago, it had fired a test shot at Mars, completely wiping out New Sol Colony in seconds. 500,000 people had died instantly, turned to dust and scattered across the red planet's surface. The Vorthaks were unlike anything humans had ever encountered before. These alien creatures stood nearly 10 feet tall, with thick reptilian skin covered in natural armor that looked like black metal scales. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness of space, and their voices sounded like grinding metal when they spoke. They had razor-sharp claws that could cut through steel, and their technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth had ever built. For over 200 years, the Vorthak Empire had been conquering world after world across the galaxy. They were ruthless and efficient killers who showed no mercy to any species that dared to resist them. 23 different civilizations had already fallen to their might. Some had tried to fight back with advanced weapons and powerful armies, but it never mattered. The Vorthaks would simply bring the Star Eater to their solar system and threaten to destroy their home planet unless they surrendered immediately. Most species gave up without a fight once they saw the massive weapon. Those foolish enough to resist were wiped out completely, their worlds turned into floating rocks and debris. The Vorthaks believed that fear was the ultimate weapon, and they used it better than anyone else in the galaxy. But now they had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity. The aliens had studied Earth's military forces and decided that humans were weak and primitive. They saw our spaceships and thought they were inferior. They looked at our weapons and laughed at how simple they seemed compared to their advanced technology. The Vorthaks were so confident in their superiority that they didn't even bother to bring their full fleet to Earth. They thought the Star Eater alone would be enough to make humanity surrender in terror. Kim Jae watched as the weapon's energy core began to glow brighter and brighter. Massive amounts of power were building up inside the alien superweapon, preparing for the shot that would end human civilization forever. The Admiral's communication officer, Lieutenant Park Min, was receiving panicked reports from observation posts all across the solar system. Everyone could see what was coming. The Star Eater's charging process was designed to be slow and terrifying. The aliens wanted their victims to have plenty of time to think about their approaching doom. They enjoyed watching entire civilizations panic and beg for mercy as death approached from the stars above. But something was wrong. Kim Jae noticed it first through his binoculars, strange flickers of light deep inside the weapon's core. The energy readings on his screens were jumping wildly, showing power levels that didn't make sense. The Star Eater was supposed to be the most advanced piece of technology in the galaxy. Built by the greatest Vorthak engineers over many decades, it had never failed before. Suddenly, warning alarms began blaring throughout the alien fleet. The Star Eater's energy core was becoming unstable. Massive electrical arcs were shooting across its surface like lightning bolts. The Vorthak engineers were desperately trying to shut down the charging process, but their controls weren't responding. In the space of just 30 seconds, everything changed. The weapon's core collapsed in on itself, creating a devastating chain reaction that spread through the entire structure. The Star Eater, the most feared weapon in galactic history, tore itself apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the night sky like a second sun. The blast was so powerful that it destroyed nearly half of the Vorthak fleet instantly. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds were reduced to twisted metal wreckage floating in space. The aliens who had seemed so invincible just moments before were now struggling to survive in damaged vessels with failing life support systems. In the sudden silence that followed the explosion, Admiral Kim Jae smiled for the first time in months. He picked up his communication device and broadcast a message to the remaining alien ships. "This is Admiral Kim Jae of the Earth Defense Force. You came here to destroy us. Now you're about to learn what happens when you threaten humanity's home. Deep underground in the mountains of Korea, something incredible was happening. For the first time in over 40 years, enormous steel doors were slowly grinding open. These weren't ordinary doors. They were each the size of a football field and had been sealed shut since the global peace accords were signed back in 2157. The world's governments had decided that ground-based military vehicles were completely useless in an age of space warfare, so they had locked away all of humanity's tanks, artillery, and armored vehicles in these massive underground bunkers. But one person had never forgotten about these sleeping giants. Dr. Lee. So had been just a young engineering student when the peace accords were signed, and while everyone else was focused on building spaceships and orbital weapons, she had a different vision. She believed that someday humanity might need these ground forces again. So for 30 long years, she had been working in secret, using her position as head of the Terrestrial Defense Research Division to quietly upgrade every single vehicle in storage. The work had been incredibly dangerous and expensive. Dr. Lee had to smuggle alien technology from crashed ships and failed diplomatic exchanges. She studied Vorthak energy weapons, reverse-engineered Zeltharian shield generators, and even managed to acquire quantum processors from a dozen different alien species. Piece by piece, component by component, she had been transforming humanity's old military vehicles into something the galaxy had never seen before. Now, as the bunker doors finally opened and sunlight streamed into the darkness for the first time, in decades the fruits of her labor began to emerge. The first vehicles to roll out were the Thor-class heavy tanks, and they were absolutely terrifying to behold. Each one weighed over 500 tons and was the size of a small building. Their armor plating had been forged using alien metallurgy techniques that made them nearly indestructible. The main cannon on each tank wasn't the simple projectile weapon it had once been. Dr. Lee had replaced it with a plasma cannon powerful enough to punch holes through starship hulls. The energy for these weapons came from miniaturized fusion reactors that had been adapted from captured alien technology. Behind the heavy tanks came the hydromobile artillery platforms. These vehicles looked like giant mechanical spiders, with multiple weapon arms extending from a central armored body. Each artillery piece was equipped with quantum targeting systems that could track and hit targets from incredible distances. The quantum computers inside these machines could calculate trajectory, wind speed, target movement, and atmospheric conditions faster than any human brain ever could. But the most impressive vehicles were the legendary Titan siege engines. These weren't just tanks. They were moving fortresses that towered over everything else on the battlefield. Each Titan was larger than most alien cruiser ships and carried enough firepower to level entire cities. They moved on massive tracked wheels that could crush concrete and steel like paper. The armor on these monsters was so thick that it would take a direct hit from a starship's main weapons to even scratch them. Colonel Han Su stood in the command center watching this incredible display of human engineering. He was a veteran soldier who had spent his entire career training for a war that everyone said would never come. While other military officers had moved to space-based positions, Han Su had volunteered to stay with the ground forces, even when it seemed like a dead-end assignment. He had trained his crews relentlessly, running simulation after simulation, keeping their skills sharp even when the rest of the world had forgotten they existed. Now, as he watched his soldiers climbing into their upgraded war machines, Han Su felt a mixture of pride and determination. These weren't just random conscripts, they were specialists who had devoted their lives to mastering ground combat. Each tank crew had worked together for years, learning to operate their vehicles like extensions of their own bodies. The artillery teams could coordinate devastating bombardments with perfect precision. The engineering corps could build bridges, clear obstacles, and repair damaged equipment under fire. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The Vorthak aliens, confident after destroying the Star Eater, had begun landing ground forces all across Earth. They believed that humans were weak primitives who could be easily crushed by superior alien warriors. The Vorthaks had sent down their elite ground troops, 7-foot-tall reptilian soldiers with advanced weapons and powered armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional human weapons. But as the alien sensors began detecting massive underground movement, the Vorthak commanders started receiving reports that didn't make sense. Their instruments were showing enormous metallic objects moving beneath the Earth's surface, heading toward their landing zones. The readings indicated vehicles far larger than anything in their databases of human military equipment. Colonel Han Su smiled as he received the first targeting data from orbital reconnaissance satellites. The aliens had no idea what was coming. For them, they expected to fight scared humans with simple weapons. Instead, they were about to face the most advanced ground combat force ever assembled, a perfect fusion of human, tactical brilliance and alien technology that would change warfare forever. The frozen plains of Siberia had always been known for their harsh winters and endless snow, but on this particular morning, they were about to become the site of the most important battle in human history. Major Choi Yu stood in the command tower of her massive Thor-class tank, watching through advanced periscopes as 80,000 Vorthak warriors spread across the landscape like a dark tide of death. The aliens had chosen this location carefully. The wide-open plains gave their hovercraft plenty of room to maneuver, and they believed the flat terrain would prevent humans from using any kind of defensive positions. The Vorthaks were masters of aerial warfare who had conquered dozens of worlds by using their superior mobility and advanced flying vehicles. They had never encountered an enemy that could match their speed and firepower from the ground. Major Choi Yu had been waiting for this moment her entire life. She was the daughter of tank crews who had served in the old human conflicts, and she had grown up listening to stories about the great armored battles of the past. While other young officers had joined the Space Force, Yu had chosen to stay with ground combat, believing that someday tanks would be needed again. Now commanding the 5th Armored Corps, she was about to prove that old-fashioned ground warfare still had a place in the modern galaxy. Through her enhanced vision systems, Yu could see the alien forces arranging themselves for attack. The Vorthak warriors were impressive creatures, standing over 8 feet tall with muscular reptilian bodies covered in natural armor plating. They carried energy weapons that could melt through steel, and their powered exoskeletons made them incredibly strong and fast. But what made them truly dangerous were their hovercraft, sleek flying vehicles that could zip across the battlefield at incredible speeds while raining death from above. The alien commander, war leader Gorthak, was confident this would be an easy victory. His forces had crushed human resistance on 3 other continents in the past week. The humans had tried to fight back with their primitive aircraft and simple weapons, but Vorthak technology was centuries more advanced. These ground-dwelling primitives would be swept away like dust before the storm. But as the alien hovercraft began their attack run, darting between the rolling hills and preparing to unleash their devastating weapons, something completely unexpected happened. The ground beneath them began to shake and rumble, as if a massive earthquake was building up deep underground. Major Yu watched her tactical displays as 400 human tanks moved into position across a front that stretched for dozens of kilometers. These weren't the simple armored vehicles that the aliens had studied in their intelligence reports. These were nightmares of human engineering, upgraded with 30 years of captured alien technology and powered by fusion reactors that could generate enough energy to run a small city. The Vorthak pilots, confident in their aerial superiority, swooped down toward what they thought were easy targets. Their energy shields were designed to deflect the most advanced weapons known to galactic science. They had faced plasma cannons, particle beams, and quantum disruptors without taking a single casualty. But they had never encountered the hybrid weapons that Dr. Lee So had developed in her secret laboratories. Yu raised her communication device and spoke the words that would change the course of galactic history. All units, fire. The dawn sky exploded into a brilliant aurora of destruction as 400 plasma kinetic cannons fired simultaneously. The hybrid weapons combined the devastating energy of alien plasma technology with the crushing physical impact of human kinetic projectiles. The result was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Vorthak shields, designed to deflect pure energy attacks, were completely useless against weapons that combined both energy and physical force. The alien hovercraft began falling from the sky like burning meteors, their advanced technology no match for human ingenuity and determination. War leader Gorthak watched in horror as his supposedly invincible air force was destroyed in minutes. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were winning. His ground forces, who had seemed so powerful and intimidating just moments before, suddenly looked small and vulnerable as 500-ton war machines began rolling toward them across the plains. The Vorthak warriors, who had considered themselves the ultimate predators of the galaxy, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. An enemy that was bigger, stronger, and more determined than they were. The human tanks didn't just fight. They crushed everything in their path like mechanical tsunamis of steel and fire. Vorthak's final desperate transmission to his fleet was cut short by a Titan siege engine's main cannon, firing from a distance of 15 kilometers with perfect accuracy. In 8 brutal hours, an entire Vorthak army was completely destroyed, while not a single human tank was lost. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. The news of the Siberian massacre spread through the Vorthak fleet like a deadly virus. Ship commanders who had never known defeat watched their orbital surveillance feeds in complete disbelief. What they were seeing on Earth's surface didn't match anything in their military databases or tactical manuals. The humans weren't just fighting back with individual weapons or vehicles. They were conducting warfare on an industrial scale that the galaxy had never witnessed before. From their positions high above Earth, the alien observers could see massive columns of human war machines moving across every continent, like mechanical rivers of steel and fire. These weren't simple tank formations that the Vorthaks had studied in their intelligence reports. These were complete military ecosystems that turned warfare into a precisely organized industrial process. Each human armored division included dozens of different types of specialized vehicles working together like parts of a giant machine. There were engineering units equipped with massive bulldozers and excavators that could level entire mountains in hours, creating flat roads for the heavy tanks to travel on. Bridge-laying vehicles could span rivers and canyons in minutes, allowing the human forces to advance across terrain that should have been impossible to cross. The supply trains that followed behind the combat units were perhaps the most terrifying sight of all. Enormous tracked vehicles carried ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and food in quantities that seemed impossible. Mobile factories could manufacture new weapons and repair damaged equipment right on the battlefield. Medical units could treat wounded soldiers and get them back into combat within hours. The humans had turned war into an assembly line process where destruction was mass-produced with ruthless efficiency. Admiral Krex, the Vorthak fleet commander, realized that his forces were facing something completely unprecedented. In all their centuries of conquest, they had never encountered an enemy that could sustain this level of military production while actively fighting a war. Most civilizations exhausted their resources after a few major battles, but the humans seemed to be getting stronger with each passing day. Desperate to salvage their reputation and prove that Vorthak military might was still supreme, the alien command decided to attempt another landing. This time, they chose the Sahara Desert, believing that the harsh environment and lack of cover would give their forces an advantage. 60,000 elite Vorthak warriors, equipped with the most advanced weapons and armor in their arsenal, descended to Earth's surface in a show of overwhelming force. But they were met by something they had never seen before: Captain Nam Ho's experimental hover tank battalion. These incredible machines represented the cutting edge of human military innovation, combining the mobility and speed of aircraft with the devastating firepower of heavy artillery. The hover tanks glided across the desert sand like steel phantoms, their advanced propulsion systems allowing them to move in any direction without being slowed down by difficult terrain. Nam Ho had been a test pilot before the war, and he understood better than anyone how to use these revolutionary new weapons. His crews had trained for months in the desert, learning to use the harsh environment to their advantage. The hover tanks could disappear behind sand dunes, then suddenly appear from completely unexpected directions to unleash devastating attacks, before vanishing again into the endless desert landscape. The Vorthaks, growing increasingly desperate, decided to deploy their most feared military unit, the Death Guard. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were elite warriors who had personally conquered entire star systems, each one a veteran of hundreds of battles across the galaxy. Their black armor was inscribed with the names of worlds they had destroyed, and their weapons were powerful enough to level city blocks. They had never been defeated in combat, and their very presence on a battlefield was usually enough to break enemy morale completely. But against Captain Nam's hover tanks, the legendary Death Guard lasted exactly 12 minutes. The surviving aliens, traumatized by what they had witnessed, could only broadcast a single word back to their fleet: demons. They had watched their most elite warriors, fighters who had seemed invincible for centuries, crushed like insects by human war machines that moved like ghosts across the desert battlefield. Meanwhile, General Park Min was coordinating the entire global campaign from her mobile command fortress, a land battleship so enormous that it required its own squadron of fighter aircraft just to provide air cover. This moving headquarters was larger than most alien warships and contained enough communication equipment to control military operations across multiple continents simultaneously. From her command center, General Park could see the bigger picture of humanity's campaign. Her forces were advancing on every continent, pushing alien survivors into increasingly desperate positions where they had no hope of escape or reinforcement. The Vorthax, who had arrived at Earth expecting an easy conquest, now found themselves trapped on a hostile world where the very ground seemed to be fighting against them. The galaxy was learning a terrible lesson about humanity. They didn't just fight wars, they perfected them. The remnants of the once mighty Vorthak fleet hung in Earth's orbit like broken teeth, their hulls scarred and blackened from previous battles. What had started as a proud armada of conquest was now reduced to less than a quarter of its original strength. Ships that had terrorized dozens of worlds were now desperate refugees in space, their crews watching helplessly as their ground forces were systematically destroyed across Earth's surface. Supreme Commander Thex stared at the tactical displays. In his flagship's command center, his reptilian features twisted with rage and desperation. For over 300 years, he had led Vorthak forces to victory after victory across the galaxy. Entire civilizations had surrendered at the mere mention of his name. He had personally overseen the conquest of 17 different star systems, and his reputation as an unbeatable military leader was legendary throughout known space. But now, facing complete defeat at the hands of these primitive humans, Thex made a decision that would either restore Vorthak honor or end their empire forever. He would gather every remaining warrior, every functional weapon, every piece of military equipment left in his shattered fleet, and launch one final assault that would determine the fate of both species. The landing site he chose was North America's Great Plains, a vast expanse of flat grassland that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. It was perfect terrain for a massive ground battle, with no mountains or forests where human forces could hide or set up ambushes. Thex believed that in open combat, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, Vorthak's superior training and technology would finally prove decisive. 300,000 Vorthak warriors descended from the sky in the largest military operation in their species' history. These weren't just ordinary soldiers. They represented the best of what remained of the Vorthak military machine. Veterans who had conquered worlds, elite guards who had never tasted defeat, and specialized assault, troops equipped with weapons that could level entire cities. Their dropships darkened the sky like a swarm of metal locusts, and when they landed, the ground shook for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. But as the alien forces formed up for their final assault, they witnessed something that would haunt their nightmares for generations to come. Rising up from beyond the horizon came humanity's response to their challenge, and it was more terrifying than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Tank divisions stretched across the plains as far as the eye could see, their steel armor gleaming in the morning sunlight like an endless ocean of metal and death. These weren't just the upgraded vehicles that had crushed previous Vorthak forces. This was every tank, every armored vehicle, every piece of heavy equipment that humanity could bring to bear. Divisions that had been fighting on other continents had traveled thousands of kilometers to reach this battlefield. Reserve units that had been held back for planetary defense were now committed to this final confrontation. General Park Min rode at the front of this mechanical army in her personal command tank, Iron Thunder. This wasn't just any ordinary vehicle. It was a mobile fortress that had been specially built for humanity's supreme military commander. Its armor was thicker than a battleship's hull, Its weapons could destroy targets from incredible distances, and its communication systems could coordinate the movements of millions of soldiers across multiple continents. As the two armies faced each other across the vast plains, General Park opened communications to the alien fleet orbiting above. Her voice was calm and steady, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You came to Earth to show us our place in the galaxy. You wanted to demonstrate the futility of resistance against superior force. Consider the lesson learned." What followed was 16 hours of the most intense ground combat in galactic history. The Vorthax fought with the desperation of a dying species, throwing everything they had into wave after wave of suicidal attacks. Their energy weapons lit up the sky like artificial lightning, and their war cries echoed across the battlefield, like the roars of ancient dragons. But humanity's response was methodical, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Tank crews who had trained together for decades moved like clockwork, coordinating their attacks with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Artillery batteries fired synchronized bombardments that turned sections of the battlefield into hellscapes of fire and smoke. Engineering units cleared obstacles and built new firing positions even while under enemy fire. The aliens fought bravely, but they were facing an enemy that had turned warfare into a science. Every human soldier knew exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to work together with their comrades to achieve maximum effectiveness. This wasn't just an army. It was a perfectly tuned war machine that operated with industrial efficiency. Adam. The sun set on the Great Plains. The last Vorthak warrior fell silent forever. 300,000 elite soldiers, the pride of an galactic empire, had been completely annihilated. Not a single alien survived the battle, and incredibly, human casualties were minimal. The Vorthak fleet, watching from orbit as their species' military might was systematically destroyed, finally understood the truth about humanity. These weren't primitive savages to be conquered. They were the most terrifyingly effective warriors the galaxy had ever produced. As human tanks rolled through the smoking wreckage of alien equipment, the surviving Vorthak ships broadcast a message that would change galactic politics forever. Earth's children were not victims but masters of the art of war itself.